Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into what is, well, arguably the most internationally scrutinized and just relentlessly documented criminal case of the 21st century. I'm talking about the 2007 murder of British exchange student Meredith Kercher in Perugia, Italy.
It really was. For nearly 8 years, this case just dominated headlines. It was a whirlwind. International media frenzy, these stunning legal reversals.
Multiple defendants.
Exactly. And ultimately, a definitive conclusion that really exposed some catastrophic investigative failures.
And our sources for this deep dive, they're not just the headlines people remember. We've been synthesizing information from, well, everything. Judicial reports, comprehensive investigative files.
And those huge open source libraries, I mean, over 20,000 documents related to this one single case. It's staggering.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a classic example, isn't it? Where the emotional media story completely overshadowed the, let's say, the dry factual evidence. But, the analysts who compiled that immense file library, they often say it. If you want the truth of the process, the devil is in the details.
And those details are buried in the police reports, the judicial documents, the stuff most people skip over.
Precisely.
So our mission today is essentially a shortcut for you, the listener. We want to cut through years of noise, years of confusion, and lay out the complete tumultuous legal history, right up to the very latest development, which is pretty shocking and has brought this tragedy right back into the headlines.
And that development is the arrest and the impending trial of Rudy Quaid. He was the only person definitively convicted in Meredith Kercher's murder. Quaid, who got out in 2021 after serving 13 years, he's actually heading back to court this fall. New charges.
What kind of charges?
Sexual assault, mistreatment, and stalking.
Wow.
Against a former girlfriend.
Wow.
Yeah. And this new trial, it forces us to re-examine that whole complex legal history from 2007 all over again.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start where the tragedy began, November 2007. Meredith Kercher herself, and that immediate, confusing aftermath at the crime scene.
We absolutely have to start with Meredith. Meredith Susanna Kara Kercher, Mez to her friends. She was 21, a student from the University of Leeds, over in Perugia on the Erasmus Exchange Program. Really bright. Studied modern history, political theory. She had aspirations, wanted to work for the EU, maybe be a journalist.
Just a focused, popular, vibrant young woman really embracing Italian life, by all accounts.
Totally. She lived in this 4-bedroom flat, Via della Pergola 7, shared it with 2 Italian women, Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mazzetti, and the American student, Amanda Knox.
Right, and the murder itself is believed to have happened on the night of November 1st. All Saints' Day.
That's right, a public holiday in Italy. And crucially, her Italian flatmates, Filomena and Laura, they were out of town for the long weekend.
Okay, so Meredith's body was discovered the next afternoon, November 2nd. What was the state of the scene? That seems critical.
Oh, absolutely critical. She was found lying on the floor of her bedroom. The door was locked, and she was covered by a duvet. The autopsy later revealed just how brutal the attack was. 16 bruises, 7 cuts, including that fatal cut to her neck.
And there were indications of sexual assault, too.
Yes. Pathologists interpreted specific injuries, particularly around the genital region, as suggesting she'd been immobilized during a sexual assault.
And what immediately complicated things, what really sort of poisoned the well for the whole investigation, was how the crime scene itself was initially read, right?
Absolutely. It centered on that broken window in Filomena Romanelli's room. Glass was shattered. Okay, but here's the detail that raised the first huge red flag. A lot of the glass fragments were found scattered on top of things inside the room, displaced items, clothes not underneath them, like you'd expect from someone breaking in from the outside.
So the signs pointed towards a staged break-in, someone trying to make it look like a robbery gone wrong.
Exactly. Investigators, like Detective Superintendent Monica Napoleoni, they concluded pretty quickly this wasn't just some random burglary. They figured the signs of forced entry were deliberately faked. A deception, calculated to point the police away from people inside the house or people who knew Meredith.
And that assumption of staging, it immediately put the residents under intense scrutiny.
Intense is the word. And almost instantly, the focus landed squarely on Amanda Knox and her boyfriend at the time, Raffaele Solicito. They'd only been dating a couple of weeks.
Right. And Knox's own account of discovering the body became a major point of contention later on.
It did. Her story was she'd been with Solicito, came back to the flat alone first, found the front door unlocked, which was unusual, saw blood drops in the shared bathroom, then noticed Meredith's bedroom door was locked. She went back to Solicito's, he came back with her. They saw the broken window in Filomena's room, tried and failed to force Meredith's door open, and then called the Carabinieri, the police.
But The way the police handled Knox's questioning after that, I mean, that itself became a huge issue, didn't it? Fundamentally flawed.
Oh, fundamentally. And those flaws were central defense arguments for the next decade. Knox was questioned repeatedly, often for hours on end, over 4 days straight. Crucially, without a lawyer present for much of it.
That sounds incredibly high pressure.
Extreme pressure. She later testified under oath that she felt under extreme psychological pressure. She even claimed she was struck by police during one session.
And it was in that environment, that contested interrogation setting, that she implicated herself and someone else.
Yes. On November 6th, after days of this, she signed statements implicating herself in the crime and also pointing the finger at Patrick Lumumba, her boss, at a bar where she worked part-time.
But she retracted that later.
She did, very quickly. She said the implication was coerced, forced out of her due to the pressure, the threats, the confusion. She was exhausted, scared.
Which was obviously devastating for Lumumba.
Horrific. He was arrested, thrown in jail for 2 weeks, based purely on her statement. But his alibi was solid, confirmed by independent witnesses, so he was released.
But the legal fallout for Knox stuck, didn't it, even after she was cleared of murder?
It did. That conviction for calumnia, slander against Lumumba, for making that false accusation, even under duress, that conviction remains upheld by the Italian courts. It's a legal shadow that follows her.
So this early chaos, the staged break-in theory, the really questionable interrogations, the false accusation, it just created this incredibly toxic foundation for everything that followed.
Absolutely. A terrible start.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the 3 individuals who ultimately faced trial, but on 2 really distinct legal tracks. Let's start with the one person whose involvement was confirmed by, well, hard evidence, Rudy Guade.
Right. Rudy Herman Guade. He was originally from the Ivory Coast, 20 years old at the time. He lived in Perugia since he was about 5. He'd been briefly adopted by a local family, but had a history, a documented history, of petty crime break-ins.
Including something just before the murder.
Yeah, literally days before, in Milan. He broke into a nursery school and was caught. And when they caught him, he had an 11-inch knife on him.
So, already known for carrying weapons and breaking into places, and his connection to the Kercher flat specifically, that was undeniable.
Undeniable is the right word. Unlike the evidence against Knox and Sollicito, which became highly contested, Guade's presence was a scientific fact. His palm print.
The bloody palm print.
Exactly. Stained with Meredith Kercher's blood, found imprinted on the pillow that was right underneath her body.
Can't get much more direct than that.
No. And on top of that, his DNA traces were found elsewhere, crucially, on vaginal swabs taken from the victim, linking him directly to the sexual assault, and in other spots in the murder room. He was right there at the heart of it.
Did he cooperate initially?
No, he fled. Went to Germany shortly after the murder. But he was tracked down pretty quickly, arrested, and extradited back to Italy.
And once he was back, he chose a different legal path than Knox and Sollicito.
A very different path. He opted for a fast-track trial. It's called the Giudizio Abbreviato. Held in closed session basically means you accept the evidence on file in return for a potentially shorter sentence if convicted.
Okay, so what was his story? What did he claim happened that night?
Grady spun this really elaborate and ultimately, frankly, unbelievable narrative. He claimed he'd arranged to meet Meredith at the flat, sort of like a date. He said they kissed, maybe some consensual activity, but stopped short of intercourse because, he claimed, they didn't have condoms.
Okay.
Then, conveniently, he said he developed sudden stomach pains. He went to the large bathroom, which was across the apartment from Meredith's room. And while he was in there, with the water running apparently, he heard Meredith scream.
So he emerges from the bathroom having missed the actual attack.
That was his claim. He said he came out, rushed to her room, found her dying, and saw a shadowy figure, a white man, he implied, fleeing the scene. And here's the detail the court found particularly incredible. Guade claimed this fleeing figure said, in perfect Italian, something like, "Found black man, found culprit, let's go."
Right. That sounds, well, incredibly self-serving. Trying to explain his DNA being there while pinning it on someone else with a racist trope.
That's exactly how the judge in his fast-track trial saw it. His story was dismissed as completely inconsistent with the evidence. That bloody palm print under her body, the DNA from the sexual assault, It blew his claims of consensual activity and being conveniently in the bathroom out of the water.
His story just couldn't explain the violence or his placement right there during the murder?
Not credibly, no.
So he was convicted pretty quickly.
Very quickly, October 2008, found guilty of both sexual assault and murder, initially got 30 years.
But that got reduced.
Yeah, on appeal, it was cut down to 16 years. A huge reduction, but a big chunk of that was the automatic one-third discount you get for choosing the fast-track trial process. It rewards judicial efficiency, essentially.
Okay, so Glade is convicted based on strong forensic evidence. Meanwhile, Knox and Solicito are on this separate track, heading for their first joint trial in 2009. What was the prosecution's theory connecting them to Guay and the murder?
Well, the theory put forward by the prosecutor, Giuliano Mignini, was, look, it was highly speculative, and many would say sensationalized. He argued the murder wasn't a solo act by Guay, but the result of some kind of group sexual encounter or, quote, sex game gone wrong, involving all three, Knox, Solicito, and Guay.
And they allege Knox was the ringleader.
Yeah, the mastermind, essentially. The specific allegations were disturbing. They claimed Knox banged Meredith's head, maybe held her face, tried to strangle her, and even delivered the fatal stab wound.
And Solicito and Gray's roles in this theory?
Solicito was supposedly helping restrain Meredith, while Guay carried out the sexual assault simultaneously. It required believing in this chaotic, synchronized attack by three people, despite vastly different levels of actual physical evidence linking them to that room.
And the court, in that first trial, bought it, despite the questions already swirling about the staged break-in and those interrogations.
They did. In December 2009, the Court of Assizes in Perugia found them both guilty. Knox got 26 years. Solicito 25.
And that verdict is what really ignited the global media firestorm, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Turned the case into this huge international saga and set the stage for all the appeals and reversals that followed.
Right, which brings us squarely to the core of the judicial chaos, the forensic evidence. This is where, as you said, the devil is in the details, and where the flaws in that initial investigation really came under the microscope.
Yeah, and this is where having access to that massive archive, those 20,000 plus files, becomes so important. Because, as the analysts who maintain that library point out, most journalists, most authors, they focus almost exclusively on just 2, maybe 3, highly contested DNA samples.
While ignoring
Hundreds of pages of crucial police paperwork. Things like the initial crime scene analysis reports, the UACV reports, which, if you read them carefully, already flagged inconsistencies and potential issues way back in 2007.
So by chasing the sensational narrative around the suspects,
They missed the systemic failures in the evidence collection and analysis itself. The focus on personalities obscured the need to really scrutinize the methods.
Okay, so let's drill down. What were those key pieces of DNA evidence used against Knox and Solicito in that first trial? The ones everything hinged on.
There were really 2 main ones that formed the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. First, a kitchen knife. It was found not at the crime scene, but in Rafael Solicito's apartment drawer.
And the claim was?
The prosecution claimed this was the murder weapon. They asserted it had Meredith Kercher's DNA on the blade, a tiny trace, and Amanda Knox's DNA on the handle.
Okay, that's one. What was the second?
The second was a metal bra clasp. It had been detached from Meredith's bra during the struggle, found on the floor near her body. The prosecution alleged this tiny clasp had Rafael Solicito's DNA on it.
So these 2 items, the knife from his flat, the bra clasp from the scene, were literally the only physical things tying Knox and Solicito directly to the murder itself.
Exactly. If the science behind those 2 pieces was flawed, the whole conviction rested on shaky ground.
Which is what the defense argued, leading to that independent review during the first appeal in 2011.
Correct. The appeal court, recognizing the controversy, ordered a full independent review. They appointed 2 highly respected forensic experts, Professor Carla Vecchiotti and Professor Stefano Conti, to re-examine everything related to that knife and that bra clasp.
And their findings were?
Devastating for the prosecution's case.
So
let's take the knife first.
Okay, the knife from Solicito's drawer. What about the trace on the blade supposedly belonging to Meredith?
Conti and Vecchiotti concluded that the DNA attributed to Kercher could not be reliably confirmed. Why? Because the quantity recovered was, quote, extremely low. It was what's technically called low copy number DNA, LCN DNA.
Okay, LCN DNA. Why is a tiny sample inherently unreliable, or at least problematic?
Well, think about it. When you're dealing with just a few cells, maybe degraded cells, the risk of contamination skyrockets. Contamination from the crime scene itself, from the collection tools, from the lab environment, even from the analysts handling it. LCN analysis requires incredibly stringent protocols to avoid amplifying background noise or contamination instead of the actual target DNA. Many international forensic bodies, particularly back then, were very wary of using LCN results as primary evidence without strong corroborating factors.
So Conti and Vecchiotti essentially said the sample was too small and too potentially contaminated to definitively say it was Meredith's.
Precisely. They couldn't rule out contamination, which meant scientifically it was inconclusive. It couldn't be reliably used to place Meredith's DNA on that knife.
Wow. Okay, that's the knife. What about the bra clasp, supposedly with Solicito's DNA?
The findings there were arguably even more damning, but focused more on procedural errors before the DNA was even tested.
How so?
The experts found the clasp evidence unreliable for two main reasons. First, like the knife, they found issues with the testing procedures themselves, suggesting they didn't meet robust international standards for LCN analysis.
But the bigger issue was how it was handled.
Yes, the handling at the crime scene. This bra clasp was seen on the floor early on, and this is incredible, it wasn't actually collected and bagged as evidence until 46 days after the crime scene was initially processed.
46 days, it was just left there.
Left on the floor of the murder room, which had obviously been accessed multiple times by investigators in boots, potentially moving things around. Conti and Vecchiotti pointed to crime scene photos taken over that period that showed the clasp had visibly moved.
So the chain of custody was completely broken, and the risk of contamination was enormous.
Exactly. They concluded there was a significant possibility of contamination introduced during that 46-day gap due to improper evidence preservation and handling, making any DNA result found on it highly suspect.
So the independent review didn't just question the DNA results. It basically condemned the forensic procedures themselves.
It absolutely did. And the 2011 appeal judges, when they acquitted Knox and Solicito, they didn't just rely on the Conti-Vecchiotti report. They highlighted a whole raft of investigative failures.
Like what else?
They explicitly criticized the police interviews of Knox, calling them of obsessive duration. They agreed the statements she made against Lumumba were clearly the product of great psychological pressure.
And they even kicked apart the language used by the original trial judge.
Yeah, they noted that Judge Massey, in his massive report explaining the 2009 conviction, used the word probably 39 times when describing what Knox and Solicito supposedly did. That suggests a lack of certainty, doesn't it? Plus, they pointed out serious credibility issues with a key prosecution witness, a homeless man who claimed he saw the couple near the flat around the time of the murder, but who was a known heroin addict.
So, with the forensic evidence gutted by the independent review and all these other procedural flaws highlighted, the acquittal in 2011 seems like the only logical outcome.
It really did seem that way at the time. In October 2011, based on insufficient evidence and the devastating forensic review, the appellate court acquitted both Knox and Solicito of the murder charge.
Knox immediately flew back to the U.S., right?
Straight away. The only conviction left standing for her was the slander against Lumumba, for which he'd effectively already served the time while imprisoned awaiting trial and appeal.
But this case is infamous for the legal whiplash. That acquittal wasn't the end. To understand why, we need that quick primer on how the Italian justice system works with appeals. It's different.
It is, and it's crucial. In Italy, a guilty verdict from a first trial isn't considered final. Defendants have a constitutional right to an appeal, which is essentially a full retrial, second level, where all the evidence can be reexamined, new witnesses called, etc.
Okay, so the 2011 acquittal was from that second level court. What happens next?
Above that, you have the highest court, the Supreme Court of Cassation Corte di Cassazione. Their job isn't usually to reweigh the facts like the appeal court.
What do they do then?
They review points of law. Did the lower courts apply the law correctly? Was their reasoning logical and consistent? If the Cassation Court finds serious legal errors, or what they call manifest illogicalities, in a lower court's ruling, they can annul or quash that verdict.
And send it back for another trial.
Exactly. They can order a new appeal trial, usually in a different city, telling the new court what legal principles it needs to address correctly this time.
Which is precisely what happened in 2013. The Supreme Court overturned the 2011 acquittal. But how? If the forensic science had been discredited.
That was the stunner. The Cassation Court didn't suddenly say the DNA evidence was good after all. Instead, they focused on the reasoning of the 2011 appeal court judges. They ruled that the acquittal judgment contained manifest illogicalities because, in their view, it hadn't adequately explained away two key elements from the original investigation. One, the staged break-in, and two, the lingering possibility of multiple attackers.
So the Supreme Court was saying, if Guade acted alone, as your acquittal implies, you didn't properly explain who staged the break-in and why.
Essentially, yes. They felt the 2-11 court dismissed the multiple attacker theory too easily, especially given the staging evidence, without offering a strong alternative explanation that fit all the facts. They felt there were still too many unanswered questions.
So they ordered a do-over of the appeal.
A brand new appeal trial, this time to be held in Florence.
The legal roller coaster continues. So back to trial again in Florence, starting in 2013, verdict in 2014. Did anything change evidentially?
Well, they did conduct one more piece of forensic testing. They examined a tiny, previously untested trace found on that same kitchen knife from Solicito's drawer. And the result: no DNA belonging to Meredith Kercher was found. If anything, it further weakened the link between that knife and the victim.
So still no direct, reliable forensic evidence tying either Knox or Solicito to the murder yet.
Yet, astonishingly, the Florence Appeal Court in January 2014 reinstated the guilty verdicts.
How did they justify that?
They essentially seem to prioritize the circumstantial elements, the motive theory, the staged break-in interpretation, inconsistencies in Knox and Solicito's initial statements over the lack of hard forensic proof. They leaned heavily back towards the original prosecution narrative.
So Knox was reconvicted from the U.S.
Reconvicted in absentia, her sentence was actually increased slightly to 28.5 years. Solicito's there and got 25 years again. It was just unbelievable whiplash.
But still not the end. One final appeal possible, back to the Supreme Court of Cassation in 2015.
This was it. The final, definitive round. March 2015. The Cassation Court heard the appeals against the Florence convictions.
And this time,
they definitively threw out the murder convictions against both Knox and Solicito, annulled them without ordering any further trial. Final. Over.
And the reasoning this time, was it just reasonable doubt?
It was stronger than that. They invoked a specific part of the Italian legal code, Article 530, paragraph 2. It allows for acquittal not just for doubt, but when the evidence is so lacking or contradictory that the court concludes the defendant cannot have committed the crime. It's a much more profound statement of factual innocence than simply not proven.
That is a critical distinction. So what was the core conclusion in that final ruling?
The judges were unequivocal. Their written reasoning, released later, stated that Knox and Solicito cannot have materially participated in the homicide. Full stop. Why? Because there was an absolute lack of biological traces connecting either of them to the actual murder room or to Meredith Kercher's body, despite extensive testing.
Well, Gray's traces were everywhere.
Exactly. The court explicitly contrasted the absence of Knox and Solicito's DNA with the numerous traces attributable to Guade found in the room and on the victim.
So after 8 years, multiple trials, wrongful convictions, the highest court in Italy essentially concluded that Rudy Guade acted alone.
That is the definitive legal finding. And the full written report from the Supreme Court was scathing about the investigation. It talked about sensational investigative failures, amnesia among investigators, and culpable omissions.
A complete indictment of the initial police work and prosecution.
Absolutely. It essentially concluded that the rush to judgment, combined with contaminated evidence and flawed procedures, led directly to a massive, years-long miscarriage of justice for Knox and Solicito.
Which brings us back full circle to Rudy Guade, definitively the sole killer in the eyes of the law. He served his time under that reduced sentence. Let's just quickly recap his release.
Sure. Original sentence 30 years, cut to 16 on appeal due to the fast-track discount. He benefited from various Italian sentencing laws, good behavior credits. So by December 2020, he was allowed out of prison to finish his sentence, doing community service working for the Catholic charity Caritas, helping in a prison library near Viterbo.
Not total freedom yet, but out working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Supervised release, essentially. And then full release came in November 2021. He had served 13 years in total for the murder and sexual assault of Meredith Kercher.
13 years. That seems remarkably short given the crime.
It is exceptionally short by most standards. It's a direct result of that initial choice to take the fast-track trial and the subsequent sentence reductions.
What was the reaction from the Kercher family's lawyer, Francesco Maresca, when Guade was fully released?
Maresca acknowledged that sentence reductions happen in the Italian system, but he publicly questioned if, quote, such a low effective sentence could be sufficient for a murder of this kind. He spoke about the difficulty of explaining it to Meredith's family, the sense of injustice that remained.
Understandable. And now, just a couple of years after getting out completely, Guade is facing new, serious charges. This is the latest chapter.
That's right. This new case emerged in 2023. A 25-year-old woman, a former girlfriend of Guaid's from Viterbo, where he had settled, came forward with allegations.
And the charges are?
He's now facing trial for sexual assault, physical mistreatment, and stalking against this woman.
And this relationship actually started while he was still serving his sentence.
It did, bizarrely. They began dating while he was on the community service regime, still technically serving time. The relationship continued after his full release in 2021, but ended abruptly in 2023 when she went to the police.
Alleging patterns of violence and control.
Exactly. Escalating behavior, according to the reports.
And the evidence in this case sounds very different from the contested DNA in the Kercher investigation.
Oh, worlds apart. It highlights the shift to digital evidence, really. The investigating magistrate mentioned the evidence dossier includes over 100,000 photos, thousands of chat messages, audio recordings, all exchanged between Guaid and the alleged victim.
A massive digital footprint.
A modern trail, traceable, potentially providing a much clearer picture of the interactions than was possible with the degraded physical evidence back in 2007. His first hearing for these new charges is set for November 4th.
What's Guaid saying about these new allegations? Is he denying them?
Completely. His lawyer maintains his innocence and has also raised concerns that Guaid won't get a fair trial because of, the huge notoriety from the Kercher case. Prejudice, essentially.
And Guaid himself.
He actually posted on Facebook complaining he's the victim of a media hunt, trying to ruin his life just as he was trying to reintegrate.
But the authorities are taking the new allegations seriously.
Very seriously. He's been placed under a special surveillance regime that's a significant restriction. He has to wear an electronic ankle bracelet. There's a 500-meter restraining order keeping him away from the alleged victim, and he needs police permission to leave the Viterbo area. These aren't minor precautions.
It indicates they see a real risk. So this entire saga, over 15 years now, it's just layers upon layers of tragedy and systemic failure, isn't it? You have Meredith Kercher, this bright young woman whose life was brutally stolen. You have Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito, who lost years of their lives, imprisoned based on what Italy's highest court ultimately called sensational investigative failures.
And then you have Rudy Guaid, the person the law finally settled on as the sole killer, now out after a relatively short sentence and immediately facing new, deeply disturbing charges. It really is a textbook case study, isn't it? A cautionary tale about how initial errors may be a rush to judgment, confirmation bias, definitely poor evidence, handling how those things can just cascade disastrously through a justice system. Years of pain, injustice, judicial resources wasted.
And while Knox has become an advocate for the wrongfully convicted and Solicito works in tech, you have to assume the trauma for the Kercher family just endures.
Absolutely. And even the final legal conclusion that Guaid acted alone while definitive legally, it still leaves so many questions unanswered about the why and the precise how of the attack. Guaid's story about the shadowy fleeing figure was dismissed as false, but because he never gave a truthful account, the actual motive, the exact sequence of events that night, it remains shrouded in ambiguity. It just adds another layer of pain for the family.
Yeah. Which brings us back to where we started, almost navigating this incredibly dense cloud of information. We mentioned relying on that huge online file library, the 20,000 plus documents.
Right, that archive. Compiled by legal analysts, people deeply invested in the case specifics. And their stated goal was precisely to prevent crucial details from being lost, and importantly, to correct the often inaccurate narratives that took hold. Their argument was that too many journalists and commentators just skipped the hard stuff, the detailed forensic reports, the dense court rulings, and focused only on the easily digestible, often misleading, suspect-focused drama.
So here's the final thought then. We spent 8 years debating the reliability of evidence, seeing how ignoring forensic standards led to wrongful convictions. Now we have this massive, transparent digital archive designed to showcase all the documentation, especially the overlooked official records. Does this kind of hyper-transparency, having 20,000 documents available online, actually make achieving objectivity easier in these complex, controversial cases? Or does the sheer volume make it harder to see the wood for the trees?
That really is the paradox, isn't it? On one hand, having everything out there, the police reports, the court transcripts, the forensic protocols, theoretically removes any excuse for relying on simplistic media takes. The proof of the investigative failures, for instance, is right there in black and white if you look. But the sheer volume is overwhelming. Who, realistically, outside of dedicated researchers or lawyers, has the time, or frankly the skill set, to wade through thousands of pages of dense, often technical, Italian legal and police documents? The archive preserves the details, yes. The exact contamination measurements, the specific legal criticisms word for word from the Supreme Court. But accessing that truth still requires immense discipline and effort from anyone trying to understand the case.
So transparency is necessary, but not sufficient. The challenge in the digital age isn't just access to information, it's developing the critical skills and, maybe more importantly, the patience to engage with the difficult, detailed sources that actually matter.
Exactly. It's a battle against the easy narrative, the quick take, a battle of depth versus speed.
A fitting place to end this deep dive into a case where, as you said, everyone was looking, but maybe not enough people were actually reading the fine print.
Indeed.
Thank you for navigating this incredibly complex history and its really sobering lessons with us today. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.